Okay, welcome to this very first podcast on innovation in the corporate world. And today we're speaking to Tristan Kromer. Tristan and I have known each other for quite a while now from the early days in innovation. Tristan is the founder of Chromatic, an innovation consultancy from San Francisco. And today we are here to talk about innovation accounting. So Tristan, good morning to you there in New York.
Good morning, Rob.
This time. So how were your Christmas days?
Excellent. Many small presents, a couple big ones, and a lot of good stuff to eat. So very happy with a collection of jams.
Some cool gadgets or a book.
Yeah. All of the above. I got a book and a lot of jams and stuff to make kind of fun meals and spices. So
awesome. So today we're gonna speak about innovation accounting. If fascinating topic, if you ask me. But let's start first to talk a bit about you, your background, your experiences so far in innovation. So who's Tristan Kromer and what is Chromatic doing?
Yeah, my background has always been in the sort of creative entrepreneurial realm. I spent 10 years actually in the music industry doing both as a musician, but also as a marketer and producer. And I leveraged those marketing skills not only to run my own bands, but help others with theirs, but eventually leverage that into making what seemed like a fairly radical shift at the time into IT security, but wound up actually being very familiar in terms of the skills and discipline required to put together a group of individuals who had disparate skills and figure out how to create something new with them. So I wound up in IT security for 5 years, and then eventually I lived in 5 different countries around the world, including Vietnam, Taiwan, Germany, and Switzerland. And eventually wound up moving to Silicon Valley, where I got embedded in the tech scene, right when the startup scene was really starting to pick up. So I sat in Dogpatch Labs, about 50 feet from Instagram when they were getting started, and all these fascinating companies who were getting started at the time, and really kind of cut my teeth on tech entrepreneurship. So being a founder myself, also working with others, trying to support their startups, and really just learning what it is to do tech entrepreneurship, in that it was, again, both very familiar and very different in the way that they approached things, in the way that they rejected the 80-page business plan, in the way that they focused on this rapid iteration and testing, which was very unfamiliar to me working in a large-scale corporate environment. I was always dreaming of the rapid 48-hour turnaround on a build, but instead having to wait 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, 6 months for a big project to get out the door and actually get some feedback on. So it was really there where I really kind of felt the kinship of the entrepreneurs around me, and kind of learned what it is to do what we consider now modern entrepreneurship, this rapid iteration focused, data-driven pursuit of the creation of value and the creation of new business models. And so I've been kind of in startup land for the last 10 years, first as an entrepreneur, then supporting other entrepreneurs, working with accelerator programs around the world, in San Francisco, in Vietnam, in Mexico, in Belgium, and eventually moving into larger organizations like the US government, or large companies like Salesforce or Unilever, and seeing how entrepreneurship changes depending on what environment you're in. And that's where I am now. I'm still kind of in the thick of it, working on my own little side projects when I have a little bit of time to explore and make sure I still know how to do the things that I teach, but also really working with both startups and large organizations, enabling innovation in one form or another. That's really been my job for the past 20 years, it feels like, and it's the job of everybody in my team. We're all entrepreneurs, and we all try and focus on how we can create the most value with the least amount of effort.
I think that's also from my side, I'm doing this myself as well. It's very important to be an entrepreneur yourself and not only talk about entrepreneurship, because if I talk for myself, so it's not only about the skill sets and the network you have, but it's so much about the mindset, and that you really have been there yourself to can really translate and see what good entrepreneurship actually looks like. So how did you actually wind up in that corporate world, that corporate innovation world? So was there a pivotal moment that you ended up there, a project or?
Well, actually, I guess I can remember. I mean, first of all, it wasn't like I don't think any of us in the early stage went out to seek out large corporations. They came to us. There was a time in Silicon Valley where I was running the Lean Startup Circle group, and attending a bunch of other meetups, and you would start to see these people kind of on the periphery of the meetup. At that time when we used to get together in person, you used to see these people kind of circling around the side who maybe didn't have a tie on but had a button-down shirt, which was maybe a little unusual in Silicon Valley at the time. And you go over and say hello and be like, oh, what do you do? What's your startup? That's the standard opener for anybody you meet in Silicon Valley. And they kind of like a little bit shy say like, oh, I work for Intuit, or I work for GE. And you're like, huh, that's interesting. Like, what are you doing there? So the larger corporations really came out and were seeking out how to do innovation for themselves and how to compete against these scrappy 3-person startups. And so they did what I think is quite natural. They went to the startups and tried to observe and see what was going on. And it was funny, several years later, I went to an Innovation Catalyst event hosted by Intuit, which was Intuit showing the world how they innovate. And they ran a workshop to show their approach and their method. And I was there, and I think David Bland was there, and maybe Aaron Eden, Rand Cooper were there, a bunch of different people were there. And it was very funny seeing their workshop because they'd clearly been quite smart about it, but they'd stolen from like this little bit from Janice Frazier, this little bit from Brant, and Aaron helped them develop this. So it was like little pieces of techniques and tips and tricks that they kind of gathered from all these different places and put them together into the Intuit Innovation Catalyst method. So I thought it was also, it was brilliant. It was very good that they took it, they wrapped it, and they made it their own. So it wasn't like this external thing that was rejected as, well, that's not how we do things in Intuit. It was very much felt like an Intuit homegrown program, but it also sort of irritated me a little because I didn't see like Janice Frazier's name credited where that was that format. I didn't even see like Trevor Owen's name underneath the Javelin board that they were using, but they did a good job, and eventually they put their little bibliography in there. So I have a lot of appreciation for that. So it's things like that. Also, going and being asked for the first time to do a workshop in a large corporation. I won't say which corporation it was, but being asked to go and give the same sort of workshop that we would give to startups into a large corporation. And just the kind of recognition that although there was a lot of hesitancy from myself and my colleagues at the company Luxor at the time, we had a little wariness. We thought that all the corporate people were just cubicles and like people from Dilbert cartoons who were completely uninspired and uninteresting and didn't want to create anything. I think there was kind of a recognition that when we started doing those workshops that these folks are genuinely excited. Like they see an opportunity where if they can improve something by 1% or even 0.1%, they can positively impact millions of customers, if not tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of customers. If they can improve the logistics around their shipping process, they can save 200,000 tons of CO2, something like this, 200 million tons of CO2. These small changes in these very, very large corporations can actually have a pretty profound impact on both sustainability, social justice, and profit and loss. So it was actually really inspiring to see these people who we thought of as these kind of corporate drones be really inspired and be inspiring and show us like what an impact you can have inside a large corporation. And so that really kind of opened up the floodgates. And I think a lot of people saw that it was not only possible to do innovation inside a large corporation, but could be extremely beneficial for not only that corporation, but for the planet. So that was kind of a good moment for me of just recognizing that, you know what, we're all just people and we all want to create something cool. So let's do it.
Interesting story. So if you look at the current state of corporates and innovation, lots has happened, and lots of corporates started open innovation programs, accelerators, educational programs, you name it. But if we just look back from today and the past 2-3 years, what do you see as major trends in innovation happening at corporates?
Well, of course, the past 2 or 3 years have been seriously impacted by COVID, but I think it's really only amplified the existing trends, not only towards things like this remote work, but also trends that existed kind of in the innovation departments. So, 10 years ago, everything swung from a 80-page business plan that was very calculation-oriented, shall we say, financial model-driven. And it really swung the other way to qualitative data, to doing customer interviews, to doing these very, very kind of basic tests with very small sample sizes and maybe just qualitative kind of gut feeling data. And that was the new business case, right? Like, don't waste your time writing an 80-page plan. Just go around and kind of look at the fuzzy data of people's feelings. And I think that was very good. Like, design thinking really brought a huge amount of getting this rapid qualitative data to make decisions very early on to see if your product was even desirable. But in the last 2 or 3 years, I think what's happened a lot is, this has been happening for a while, but companies at some point need to make some money. And it's not very helpful if you go to the chief financial officer and say, our innovation is doing great. People seem to like it. Like, that's not really an acceptable answer. You have to show that even if you can't show that you'll make your business case or you'll make a good ROI in the next 1 or 2 years, you have to show that there is some promise, that there is something 5 years from now, that there is something 10 years from now. And you have to communicate in a language that everybody understands, the CEO, the CFO, the CHRO. Everybody needs to understand what the prospect is so they can make their own plans and figure out how to integrate this project into the larger corporation, or how to keep it separate if they need to. But if we're not speaking in dollars and cents, it becomes very hard to have that conversation. And what I've seen happen to a lot of innovation departments is that they'll spin up something like an accelerator, and maybe it'll last for 1 or 2 years, and then people just lose patience with it. Like, if they can't move beyond just fuzzy qualitative data in early stage projects, if they can't have something that either is scaling up or looks like it's going to scale up, then people just get frustrated, and that head of innovation leaves or is asked to depart. A new one comes in, and then you have the same cycle repeat. So in these last few years, I've seen a real push, exacerbated by COVID, to kind of show what we're doing, like show the impact. And I think it's kind of about time. We need to bridge that gap. We need to start talking about financials, but still understand that it's very uncertain, that it's not an 80-page business plan that's definitely going to come true. But we have to have the math that expresses the uncertainty and shows that, yeah, we could make $1 billion, or this maybe is only going to reach 1 million, but we can kind of give you a prediction and give you your odds of success with this project. That's what we need now.
Yeah, so in the early days, we saw a lot of corporates like opening up fancy rooms, getting their Techstar accelerator program going, doing a lot of workshops. Yeah, but not so much. There's happening a lot of stuff, and but much of it seemed like innovation theater. You could say lots of exactly lots of activities, but not lots of real entrepreneurial action towards achieving a profitable new business, so to say. What were some of the key points missing there? Or if I would phrase it otherwise, I've seen it going from there, from those fancy rooms, ping pong tables, etc., being cool, going into a phase now where actually the whole innovation world is more or less maturing. It's not that new anymore, and actually people are asking more and more, like, show me the impact, show me the results. What's your take on that? I mean, what's the next step for companies to move from that type of innovation to a more like mature type of innovation?
Well, I think the next step is to bring back the quantitative data to some degree, right? But again, representing uncertainty in that data. Like right now, again, if you ask a typical early stage project, what type of, what is your ROI going to be? They will have zero answer. They will not be able to tell you anything at all. And that's just not acceptable at this point. What we really need to do is start bringing in the quantitative data and start showing how to mix the qualitative data into the quantitative data to create a real projection. We have to be able to say, this project has a shot at being $1 billion business. It doesn't need to be like 90% certain to be $1 billion business. It just needs to be a 1 in 10 shot, or even a 1 in 100 shot, but it has to have a shot. And we have to be able to quantifiably say under what conditions would this project succeed? What would it take? What has to be true? Like right now, we do that on a business model canvas, and we have a bunch of sticky notes and assumptions. And we can say that, all right, well, there has to be a customer segment, there has to be a value proposition, but we're not able to say on that business model canvas, no, your acquisition rate needs to be 20%, and your cost to acquire a customer needs to be under $5, and your price for this product, it needs to be at least $5.99. We can't say that on a business model canvas. But those are the things that are really necessary for projects to have clear pivot or persevere criteria.
Why didn't this happen? Why didn't this happen before? So if you think about the corporate world and all KPIs that go around in the corporate world and then start innovating, and this quantitative part is just more or less lacking, or it seemed like to be absent. Yeah, what is the root cause for that, in your opinion?
I think the root cause is just sort of the trends. I think I'm guilty of that as much as anybody else. I used to, when I worked in a large corporation, I used to play around with, I had a spreadsheet for the division I was running in Vietnam that involved 12 different tabs of 3 different currencies, and paying people in US dollars and buying equipment in the Vietnamese currency, Vietnam Dong, and Swiss francs, and incredibly complicated calculating inflation and things like that. And when I moved to a startup and when I was creating my own company, I just like took it and kind of mostly threw it aside, because everything we're hearing about is how design thinking can solve everything, and how like this is the latest fad, or this is the latest framework, or this is the latest trend, and it'll fix everything. And that's of course never the case, right? Like the business model canvas is a wonderful tool. Like it is a great thinking framework. But when we implement these sort of things, we often kind of do the thing without understanding why we're doing the thing. Mm-hmm. If you create a business model canvas and you just fill it out and then you shove it in a drawer or pin it to your wall, and you don't actually investigate any of the assumptions or hypotheses that you've written down, you're missing the point of the business model canvas. And most of the time when I'm called into a large corporation, that's what they've done. They've taken a workshop on the business model canvas or whatever design thinking, and they've created all their business model canvases, but they forgot to iterate. Like they didn't get the point. And I think for a lot of us, we kind of got trapped in the allure of just saying, oh, well, you just have to use a bunch of sticky notes and talk to a bunch of people, and it's really fun, and that will make your innovations happen. But at the end of the day, when you start looking at, okay, I've got something that's desirable, but I need to scale it up, you need to have numbers. You need to know how many customers are. You need to do some market sizing. You need to figure out what the viral coefficient might be. There is some hard work and analytics that has to happen in order for you to scale up and actually prove that your project is not just desirable, not just technically feasible to build, but also financially viable and sustainable. And that applies to both for-profits, nonprofits, or mission-driven organizations like governmental organizations. It's the same thing. You have to know if you're going to save enough lives, reduce enough carbon, or have the impact that you want. If you want to have a business, if you want to really innovate.
If you don't do that enough, what type of problems have you seen at corporates? What happens when it's just not there, when there's no innovation accounting?
Basically, if you're not actually doing innovation accounting, right? Like the kind of unsexy word that means do the math of innovation, right? If you're not doing, I don't like the word. Work, yeah, I mean, I kind of like the word, but also I don't like the word. It's not quite as appealing as it might sound.
I think accounting is something for existing businesses. It's kind of a bit misleading. So I myself would rather try to refer to tracking some development to also address the uncertainty that's in it when moving in uncharted territory. Or have kind of learning metrics in the early stages. No? So, I mean...
Yeah. Well, I mean, so if you want to kind of highly technical jargon, you could say like hypothesis-driven financial modeling is what we want to do.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
We want to create normal financial models, but we want them to be hypothesis-driven. We want to be able to say that my hypothesis is that my conversion rate is going to be 10% on this landing page, and then 50% of those people are going to upgrade to a premium plan. And those two numbers will drive the rest of the calculations in that spreadsheet. And they will help tell me that if in 5 years, in 10 years, based on these assumptions, based on these hypotheses, this is what's going to happen. And that's not something that's entirely foreign to financial folks. Like this is something, if you took classes in your MBA as a CFO, you had a specialization in finance, these are things that you have to do.
Also for venture capitalists, I mean, that's more or less their job.
Also, although I think venture capitalists, I mean, there's a lot of different kinds of venture capitalists out there. Some are very quantitatively focused. Some just say like, you know what, it's all about blockchain. So let's just invest a bunch of money in blockchain and see what happens. But there are others like the original hypothesis behind 500 startups was very much based on the same sort of financial calculations that a hedge fund does. The reason 500 Startups, which is an accelerator in San Francisco, or I guess is an early stage VC in San Francisco, chose to be 500 startups is because they figured that was the approximate number of early stage investments you'd have to have in order to have a predictable return. Right? So some are very quantitative, some are very gut-based. That's kind of where it shakes out.
These are they're used to work with models like calculating the potential success of a startup and the risks involved, as far as I've seen those term sheets and cap tables, etc. So there's been quite some knowledge, and from my own side, I've been always a bit of kind of surprised that those kind of tools and insights never really exit the corporate world. Also the way of thinking that VCs have into the corporates. Some corporates you see it, but it's not a standard yet, so to say.
Yeah, like I remember, I guess it was almost 12 years ago or something like that, when we were making a big pivot or persevere decision for my team. Again, I did learn a lot of those tools like statistical modeling. I even learned a little statistics back in high school. But I didn't quite even think to apply that to startups. What we wound up doing was basically scenario planning, right? I knew I had this many users. I knew what the acquisition rate was. And I just said, well, if we were going to do an advertising model, what would the conversion rate have to be for us to make any money or pay our salaries? And that's very, very basic math, right? It's just okay, given these variables are fixed, that's our assumptions, you know, what does solve for X? And there are better tools out there that can get us a little bit of a better answer, that will, again, allow us to represent uncertainty in our equations. And I guess I'd explain it basically like this, like, instead of saying something like our acquisition is 20% and our upgrade to premium is 50%. There's a way of expressing this sort of thing in statistics by saying, well, you know what, I don't know exactly what our acquisition rate is going to be. Could be 20%, but could be 25%, could be 15%, could be even down to 10%. If I can express the uncertainty in a range, we can start applying something called Monte Carlo simulation to a bunch of variables to figure out what degree of uncertainty on which of these variables has the most impact, right? And that sounds like a whole mouthful, but all it really means is you take your best guess at these values and you figure out kind of the max and min. It's not exactly, but it's close enough for this conversation. We figure out the max and the min. And then instead of kind of sorting your sticky notes by your gut feeling, the math will tell you what is the most important thing to focus on. The math will tell you, should you focus on your retention rate? Should you focus on your acquisition rate? Should you focus on improving your price point? It will tell you what the most impactful thing on your sustainability is, on your financial viability is, or on your mission impact. And that adds when you're dealing with something incredibly complex, like a startup with a lot of uncertainty, you would be surprised at the variables that seem to have the most impact. It's often a revelation, even when you do a really basic financial model. People don't understand like how impactful the retention rate is going to be, how impactful the referral rate or the virality is going to be. So when you see that and you can start playing with the numbers and you can see the outputs changing, it really gives you a different perspective on how to prioritize and analyze risks as a startup and how to set benchmarks for those pivot or persevere decisions. And that can just be incredibly valuable to focus your team and give them clear numbers to target.
So we're shedding some light on the sometimes dark areas where startups are moving on in. So say you're starting to do innovation accounting. What are the things to look for? So we've heard you talking about innovation accounting, but and I'm convinced, I'm just like, hey, we need to do this. So where do I start?
I mean, the first, well, I guess you should sign up for our program. Of course, like there are a lot of different ways, I think, to start. The first thing is really just to start with the user experience. I think that's important to recognize. If you want to do real innovation accounting, you have to account for the uncertainty, and most of the uncertainty is in the user experience or the customer experience. That includes not only the user using your product and maybe becoming accustomed to and coming back and using that product again, but also for B2B or more complicated products, it could be integrating that sales process into the user experience, understanding what is my conversion rate from generating a lead to qualifying that lead to showing them a demo to having it go through procurement to having that sold. How many licenses will they buy? So really understanding like what is that entire journey from hearing about the product to actually using or reusing the product, understanding what people are going through. Until you do that, you can't really start to talk about the numbers because you don't know kind of where to measure in this user journey. So starting with the user journey is got to be the first thing. Like we can't lose the qualitative data. But once we have that, then we have to start measuring things. We have to start understanding, well, how can I know if the user is satisfied? If I do a net promoter score, is that something that I can actually plug into a financial model? Actually, not really. Net promoter score is good for some things, not good for other things. It's not really good. You can't translate it directly into a financial model, but you can translate conversion rates. You can translate the usage of a specific feature and how that correlates to the retention of your product. You can do lots of fun things when you start getting a bunch of data. And again, this works for B2B, this works for B2C, this works for B2G. But we start with the user experience and start to quantify what are the things that we can measure in this that is actually going to correlate to our financial model. Once you have that, you're really in a position to take the next step and build a financial model, which is really just thinking about how these different variables relate to one another and how they build up to that impact that you want to have, whether that's lives saved or dollars earned. And after that, then it gets really fun and we start to kind of geek out and apply the serious math to it. But I should emphasize that for those that are a little bit more math averse, for those that are think like, oh dear God, I don't want to look at a spreadsheet or all that sounds very intimidating. It's based on user experience. It shouldn't be that intimidating. There are tools nowadays that can do a lot of the hard work and the math behind this automatically or virtually automatically. But you have to understand the logic behind how, when this happens, the user sticks around. When this happens, the user refers another. That's the thing you need to understand as an entrepreneur or as a corporate innovator, is what causes what. And if you can do that, the math will sort itself out. You don't need to freak out about that.
So you're thinking about like the R funnel, like customer acquisition cost, lifetime value, that kind of metrics?
Yeah, those type of metrics are really good. The R metrics, or sometimes known as startup metrics for pirates, is a good mental framework for AARRR, acquisition, activation, revenue, referral, and retention. So those are kind of 5 metrics that every company should probably know. There's a lot of different things you can measure inside of those big bucket categories. Like you said, customer lifetime value is a good revenue metric. Retention rate is obviously retention rate. But even something like sales cycle time could be an important metric if you're a B2B and you're trying to measure acquisition. Sales cycle time is just as important in terms of cash flow as your close rate, right? The percentage of deals that you actually close. So all these are the type of numbers that you have to understand. You don't need to do the math, but you need to understand the logic behind them.
It's actually time for people to fall in love with the numbers. I see myself, and also for myself, that people are a bit of number metric averse. I don't know why we're kind of scared of that, because I totally agree with what you're saying, and I've also seen this and experienced this myself as well in projects. But wrapping things a little bit up now is like, how is this going to help innovators in corporate? So I know you address some points, but if you would sum up like 3-4 points for innovators and to motivate them to start working with these metrics and with innovation accounting, what would you say? What are the key reasons to embrace this and get started with innovation accounting?
Ultimately, you have to make decisions as an innovator. If you don't make decisions, those decisions are going to be made for you by your CEO, by your CFO, or by your growth board, whoever it is. So you want to make the best decisions possible. And no matter how math adverse you are, you have to understand that math is going to drive some of those decisions. You have to be able to demonstrate with numbers that your project has a chance to succeed and be that $1 million or $1 billion business, or you're not going to get the backing, you're not going to get the resources, whether it's a corporate funded or whether it's a VC. You have to understand the math that drives your business. So innovation accounting is really a way to make better decisions. It's a way to understand what is a good pivot or persevere threshold so that you can decide whether or not you need to pivot or whether you can keep on going and your business model is working. It's a way to predict your odds of success, to understand really clearly that based on the data we have today, we've got a 25% chance. It's pretty good for an early stage startup making $1 billion. I would take that bet. It's a way to calculate your odds of success, and it's a way to prioritize. It's a way to tell you, given what we know today, we need to focus on customer acquisition, or no, that's not it. We need to focus on customer retention based on what we know today. And all that comes from understanding uncertainty and actually measuring things.
What is it? What the actual innovators and innovation managers can avoid by starting to apply this in a structural way?
So innovation managers can avoid that sinking feeling when you've spent a lot of time interviewing customers and you feel like you have something that's really really poignant and people care about a lot. But then after 6 months of working on it or a year of working on it, one of two things happens. Either one, the numbers don't add up and you have to shut down the project, or worse yet, worse to me, is when you see a project that might have succeeded, but you can't prove it, and so you can't get any funding, and the project is shut down even though it might have succeeded. Like that to me is the worst sinking feeling in the world, when you've done something that could have worked, but you avoided doing the hard work of the financial modeling because you were afraid, because you thought maybe it's somebody else's job. Nobody's going to do this for you. Whether you're an entrepreneur or you're an innovator, you have to bring the data, you have to understand the data, and you have to bring that to the investors and make sure that you can get your project funded.
Okay, thank you so much, Tristan, for talking about innovation accounting and the importance of metrics, and how it can actually save your innovation and save you from frustrations and a lot of stress, because making decisions at the right moment can help you spend your time on projects that actually do work, and actually help you to get your innovation project to the next level, and avoid the decision maker doubting what you're actually working on, because you have proof to show that your innovation actually is working and is making impact. And I think that can be very helpful to innovators, and avoid them from a lot of frustrations and fears and things they have that actually see like about every day around me. So Tristan, so to wrap this thing up,
fear failure.
We've got
don't fear the numbers.
But the reality is that people fear reputation, and if the numbers can help them, I think that's very helpful. Yes. So you've got something for our audience that you're going to kick off soon to help them to get started in innovation accounting.
Yeah, we're doing a 5-week boot camp masterclass on innovation accounting. It's based on project level innovation accounting. So this is really looking at your real project and actually going through this process, actually getting the storyboard written out, figuring out what metrics you can actually measure, turning that into a financial model, and then starting to calculate pivot or persevere decision criteria and threshold. So doing all of the math, all of the things. So you should kind of come into that program with a project that has a clear solution hypothesis, and you should be leaving with clear criteria for go, no-go decisions. You should be leaving with prioritized risks, and you should be leaving with a strong understanding of what are the levers that you can use to move your business forward. That's the goal. So it's starting on January 25th. It's open enrollment, so anybody can buy a ticket. And if you are a startup, please contact us. But it is for everyone. It's for corporate innovators. It's for large organizations. It's for nonprofits. It's for B2B. The math and the principles apply to all of the above. But if you are interested in this and you're a startup, please just contact us, because startups have no money and can't afford a ticket. So you can just call us, but everybody else can just buy a ticket.
Thank you so much for the interest. I will speak soon. And thank you everyone for joining us and listening, and see you in our next episode of this podcast.
Awesome. Thank you, Rob. Appreciate it.